the big news was that a certain number of these drones, according to the polls, 19, crossed over into Polish airspace, and
Oh,
that
right.
they shot down 3 of them. And so there's a huge to do about this in Europe. And,
Article 4 has been enacted.
yeah, Article 4, which is actually really doesn't mean a whole lot. It just means that Poland is going to consult with the other members of NATO. I know DG Geopolitics has described this as a group therapy session. I think that's pretty pretty good. So, but it's if it's true, and in fact 19 crossed over into Polish airspace, um, it raises a number of questions. First of all, why did this happen? And I think it was actually the Belarusians that said that, yeah, they detected these planes. They said actually both Ukrainian and Russian drones, not planes, but drones that had been kind of pushed off course by electronic warfare, EW, and that they crossed over Belarusian airspace and were heading into Poland. And they actually warned the Poles. They have some sort of arrangement with them. Even though they're our adversaries, they do have this line of communication. They warn the Polish military, hey, that these drones are headed over towards your airspace.
Wait, who warned the Polish?
The Belarusians.
The Belarusians?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they said it was because of EW. There were these drones that were close to Polish airspace, and they got hit by EW, and they went off course and into Polish airspace. Now, in the past, this is not the first time that there have been drones. First of all, they're claiming we don't know for sure that they're Russian drones. I think there have been a couple of pictures. And actually, the ones that they've shown were not of Garans, but I think something called like the Geberi, which is not. It's basically it serves either as a decoy or as a reconnaissance drone, so it doesn't actually carry a warhead. The pictures I saw, maybe two pictures of these Geberi drones that looked like they had just landed, like they had just run out of fuel. So. So one question that raises, if there were 19 intrusions and they were only able to shoot down 3 when they were using, I guess, like the Dutch and the Polish Air Force, and they got their own air defense and whatever. They had all these, and there was another nation involved too. I forget which one it was, that they can only shoot down 3 drones out of 19. That kind of raises questions about their air defense, if in fact there were 19. Again, this is what they allege, this is what they claim, and it's probably true, but we don't know for sure. Now, why would there be so much? This has happened in the past. Occasionally, a drone goes off course and it ends up in Romanian airspace or Polish airspace. It's happened before, actually on several occasions in the past. But this time, why would there be so many? Assuming that the Polish claims are true. And I think the answer is that this was pointed out by a Swedish military analyst, actually, and I think his logic is impeccable. It's just the scale of these attacks has gone up so much that, whereas in the past, if you knocked off, 1% of the drones or 10% of them or something, that was only going to be 2 drones or so, but now, there are so many drones. And also I think that the tactics have changed, that sometimes these drones will fly in swarms or kind of in flocks together. So you could see how possibly there would be an EW burst that managed to hit one of these swarms, and then that could actually send 19 drones off, whereas in the past it just wasn't possible because there weren't enough drones in the sky close to the Polish border. But now sometimes it happens. And so this is the most, we'll see, maybe there'll be some explanation that's even more convincing. But this is the most convincing explanation that I've heard so far. Now, of course, the Europeans are claiming, again, without any evidence, that this was intentional. Immediately, it's just like von der Leyen had actually in a speech to the European Parliament claimed that, like she had heard it 15 minutes earlier. So how does she know? But of course, they immediately jump to that conclusion, and they use it. I think they just see it as a great chance to demonize Russia, to pressure the Americans to increase their support, to sabotage any chance for negotiations. It's the typical European approach, unfortunately. But you stop and think about it. It's like, why would the Russians send like these drones? Actually, apparently, a lot of them just ran out of fuel and crashed in Poland. They're completely harmless. Why would they send a number kind of drones randomly into Poland? What was the purpose? Surely the Russians understand what the Europeans were going to do. It doesn't benefit them anything. Just nothing at all. So I think it just had to be, if in fact these were Russian drones, that it just had to be an accident. Again, the result probably of some sort of EW event.
Okay, well, I guess the big question is will they be able to use this to escalate in Ukraine? Because obviously that's what von der Leyen and a lot of the EU elite wanted. That's what they're excited about this. They're like, great. Okay, and I'm sure Zelensky's jumping up with joy, like, hurrah, maybe this is my Black Swan event. Time to put on the pressure. Let's see, Article 4, that's just one away from Article 5. We're pretty close, right? So let's...
Yeah. Well, it should be pointed out that just a few days ago, roughly a week ago, the former president of Poland, Duda, spoke about an event that took place in November of 2022. And I remember that quite well. It was, it was actually a Ukrainian air defense missile that, an S-300, I believe, that possibly an S-200, but but in any case, a Ukrainian air defense missile that flew into Polish airspace and struck and killed a Polish farmer.
Right.
And the Ukrainians immediately said that this is a Russian attack, an unprovoked attack on Poland, and the NATO needs to invoke Article 5. But the president at that time said that he was under a lot of pressure from the Ukrainians to do just that, to declare this as an unprovoked attack by the Russians. But he didn't. And actually the Americans too. I just noticed it was that, generally if the Ukrainians make some sort of extravagant claim against the Russians, the Americans, no matter what, they don't need any evidence. They just back them up, like the so-called Bucha massacre or whatever. This is all, clearly the Russians did this. But in this case, actually, the Americans refused to, the Poles refused to, because they knew the game that Zelensky was playing and was trying to get him, to invoke Article 5. And they said, well, no, we don't want to do this. There was obviously resistance to that. We're not going to go to war with the Russians. But again, he's trying to do the same thing. He's trying to get them to actually become directly involved in the conflict. I think he came out with a statement. He said, we need to have some sort of integrated air defense. And, in other words, you'd have NATO planes shooting down Garans over, in Ukrainian airspace. It's like the beginning of some sort of no-fly zone. And that's what he was asking for. I don't think he's going to get it. This time they'll go to Article 4 and just they'll use it to, not to, I think they understand at this point anyway, they can't send troops into Ukraine. They're just not going to get the American backing. It's too risky. But maybe it'll help to justify sending more long-range missiles to Ukraine. It will be used, again, to pressure the U.S. to increase its support. Where the U.S. seems to be starting to pull out somewhat. Maybe this will strengthen the people like the hands of people like Kellogg in the U.S. who really want to see a recommitment, a stronger commitment to Ukraine. I think that's what we'll see in the short term. They're going to milk it for all it's worth, but there won't be any direct intervention.
Well, what is the state of the air defense in Ukraine now? I mean, they're sending all these drones in. Are Ukraine able to shoot them down? Are we seeing the state of sort of have the U.S. and NATO military evolved, their electronic warfare and anti-drone defense systems?
Right. I am kind of surprised that there was, that could be a significant event. If in fact, it was EW that sent these drones off course, that indicates that there is some sort of effective EW within Ukraine. I hadn't seen evidence of that before. So that's something to consider. That may be the more significant aspect of this event. If in fact that's what, that was the the cause of this event. Because in general, it looks like the Russians are hitting their targets, overwhelmingly hitting the designated targets, and with great precision. There was that strike a few days ago with 810 drones, and you can see the footage. There's, you can see them coming down one after another, and just very little evidence of any kind of air defense at all. And so it seems like they're just in general, they're completely exposed. So I would be curious to find out if this was EW, what was it? Is it they just managed to have something close to the Polish border, or that may be possible? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems crazy to me if the U.S., NATO doesn't have adequate air defense, that we are escalating all over the world. It's just these drones. If we can't shoot down these drones, then you're screwed, right? I mean, the drones in general
are
that's the easy target.
Right, exactly.
And so if they're mass producing these and they're getting through and you can't shoot them down, then it's just, I feel like it's just game over for a country. It's just, I just don't understand our strategy, our plan, why we want to stay in this conflict in Ukraine. And it's just so frustrating because in both of these, in the Middle East and the US, everybody knows this is not good for the United States. It's draining our resources. It's making us, morally bankrupt, militarily, financially bankrupt, and militarily weakened over time. And it's just, and we have all the cards. Trump has cards to play in Ukraine. Yeah. The intelligence. It's our generals in Germany that are directing Ukrainian troops. It's our weapons. Sure, maybe we're making the Europeans pay, but they're still ours. He has the ability to shut it down. Yeah. And the same thing in the Middle East. Attacking Tunisia, Syria, genocide in Gaza. Attacking Iran, Lebanon. Annexing the West Bank. The whole thing is insane. Bombing Doha. And none of this is horrible for the United States. And he has the ability. We're the only country that has leverage over Israel to stop this. This is our genocide too, and we could just end it. And it's just so crazy that we're not pulling any of these levers, not even saying like, hey, okay, ease up, or maybe, we'll slow down the aid, or, we won't be giving you the diplomatic cover, whatever it is. There's so many levers that we have to right. pull, but we don't pull any of them. And the question is why? Right. Why don't we play it? Why aren't we playing any of our cards? We can end all this horrible nonsense that's destroying our country, destroying our soft power, draining us economically, draining us just morally, militarily, everything. It's just, why?
Yeah. Well, again, we've talked about what's happening in the case of Israel, and I think you do have to point to the Israel lobby. Again, the thesis that was put forth by
and Epstein.
Okay, well, I don't know. Maybe I'll just say maybe on that. I'm agnostic on that question, but definitely the Israel lobby. That's clear. You don't have to have Epstein. Maybe Epstein's part of it. I'll acknowledge that. But even if Epstein never existed, we still have the Israel lobby, and it's very powerful. And again, that was a thesis put forth by Mearsheimer and Waltz, and it's just proven true. It's become increasingly obvious as time goes by that they have just outsized influence within Washington. And then it's not. I don't want to make it sound like, they're issuing orders. It's just we're willingly complicit. It's just like we have people that have become avid Zionists within this country, and they don't really need to receive any orders from Israel. They want to see Israel bomb places, and they want to emulate Israel. I mean, unfortunately, it's just like that's what we have. That's one matter. The question of the Middle East, and then we have. I think it's clear that there was some reluctance on the part of Trump and Vance. I think they actually would like to get out of this war in Ukraine, but there is this institutional commitment to doing that, and this reluctance to acknowledge limits to U.S. power. Now, there are some indications that at the edges anyway, we're beginning, even our Pentagon is beginning to acknowledge that maybe there are limits to U.S. military power. We got that. There was that statement like a couple of months ago that, hey, we can't supply any more Patriot, interceptors to Ukraine because we're out of them. And that led to all kinds of, hysteria and an outcry within the West. And then there was agreement, okay, we'll send them 17 or something like this. I can't remember what it was exactly, but it was clear that it seemed to be, there wasn't any indication that that assessment that had been made that our stockpiles were dangerously low, okay, was not true. And clearly it is true. And the Pentagon has to know about it. And I think at some point, inevitably, it just has to affect their policy, regardless of what they want to do. And we are seeing indications that they are beginning to just reassess the whole U.S. approach to the globe, and maybe even really reassess the feasibility of U.S.-led global hegemony. There was I think it was Politico that leaked it, but there was a draft of the strategic, national defense strategy, a paper that had been prepared for Pete Hegseth. And it actually argued for really pulling back. I don't know if what it said about Israel. I guess, again, maybe they didn't deal with that. They just kind of acknowledged that because Israel's Israel, we're just going to continue to support them to the hilt. But it did advocate pulling back both vis-a-vis Russia and China, which is the difference. You've had these people that say, this Russia thing isn't working for us. The Russian government did not collapse. It's not going to collapse. That whole thing just didn't work out. The Ukraine project is a failure, but we got to confront the Chinese, in the Western Pacific. But this is arguing, we don't know who's behind it, but that, we need to pull back there and actually focus on the Western Hemisphere. And now we see Venezuela. So maybe, I think it's hard for them to give up on this vision of global hegemony, but the facts are the facts. You only have so many missiles, and at some point, reality just, it starts to impose limits on your actions, and regardless of your ideology. So, we may just see this focus, this retrenchment back to the Western Hemisphere, and it really, I think, is born of the limits of Western power and the rising strength of the other powers. It's just something that, in the end, you can try to ignore it, and you can pursue your propaganda war, and in your information sphere, you're the global hegemon, and nobody can possibly oppose you. But in reality, somebody's got to look in the cupboard and see that it's bare, and that's going to affect your actions. And I think we're starting to see signs of that.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's just going to be a rapid crumbling of the military-industrial complex. This is something I'm curious about as well. It's just who in their right mind would want to purchase U.S. weaponry when, first of all, one, we have an inability to produce at scale, and you can't even get a lot of these weapons anyways, or you're on a backlog for 10 years to get an interceptor for a Patriot system that doesn't work very well. And then there's that huge bill. But then what we saw here in Doha is that maybe they can just shut you off and turn it down. Like you have a security guarantee, and then Israel just bombs you, and then nothing happens. Where's your defense? Where's your protection? And why would you want the U.S. to protect you? And then there's just the taint associated with the United States. Like, I don't want to deal a deal with the U.S. and any military equipment when we see this genocide in Gaza. And then you're just seeing, what China and Russia is able to produce. High quality weapons at scale. You're not going to run out. They're not going to tell you, sorry, you got to wait till next year to get them. Then they're way cheaper. And then you don't have that taint, the fact that they're involved in some type of genocide, and supporting Israel, which is bombing, half of the countries in the Middle East.
Yeah, well, I think, I don't know how much, these businesses has been affected so far, but I think in the long run, you're probably right.
Right. The only countries that I think will buy it will be, the NATO countries that are forced to buy it until they are we drain them completely, until they fall apart because, okay, you keep on buying our overpriced crap. We'll send you 10 a month of whatever it is. And it doesn't do anything, but it costs you $1 billion each time. It just seems like such a scam, and the poor Europeans are just, I think the problem with the Europeans is just they loved America so much back in the day, and now that it's kind of gone sour, they're having there's this cognitive dissonance in their mind. I had this experience just because when I was in college here at UT, I was in the international school, and I had all these European students every year that I was in the international house. I was doing the orientation for international students, all this stuff. And there was just they were just so cool to be in America for them. They're like, oh yeah, just see it on the movies, and now we're at a football game, all this stuff. They loved it. They loved the concept of America and the idea of Americas. I think so many Europeans did. And now it's just, it's just changing that whole perception of the United States. It just takes a little bit of time, but it's happening.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyways, I think we've gone long enough. There's any final words you have for us?
Yeah, I think we've covered, there's a lot that happened, and I think we did a pretty good job of covering it. We could actually get back to like what's happening in the battle lines. We could at least touch upon, I don't have a whole lot to say about Nepal, but we could touch upon it. But we can do that some other time. Maybe we'll learn more about what's going on.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be good to wait a little while.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye. Thanks a lot, Dad.
Okay. Bye.